This is BBC News. I'm Chris Rogers. Our top stories. President Trump fires FBI Director James Comey, the man leading the investigation into possible collusion between his election campaign and Russia, leading Democrats to call for the appointment of an independent special prosecutor.
The American people need to have faith that an investigation as serious as this one is being conducted impartially, without a shred of bias.
South Korea's new president says he favors more dialogue with the North. He's starting his first day in office after victory in Tuesday's election. The US approves supplying weapons to Kurdish forces fighting so-called Islamic State in Syria, despite fierce opposition from its NATO ally, Turkey.
Hello, I'm Sally Bundock with the business stories. A bumpy road for Toyota. The world's second biggest car maker is expected to report shrinking profits as the US market slows down. And on the farm in the US, we assess the impact of President Trump's policies in an industry that relies on migrant workers, even the undocumented ones.
Hello and welcome to BBC News. President Trump's decision to fire the director of the FBI has been met with widespread shock and a mass of questions. James Comey was the man in charge of investigating Russian interference in the US presidential election and whether or not the Trump campaign colluded with the Russians. The White House says Mr. Comey has been dismissed on the recommendation of the Attorney General, Jeff Sessions, and his deputy. Our Washington correspondent Ali Makboul reports.
Absolutely explosive news out of Washington tonight.
This is a Fox News alert. FBI Director James Comey has been fired by the President of the United States.
Americans have learned to expect almost anything from their president, but this really was high drama. FBI Director James Comey wasn't even in Washington. He was addressing FBI staff in Los Angeles when he learned he'd been sacked. A short while later, a letter arrived at FBI headquarters. You are hereby terminated and removed from office, effective immediately. While I greatly appreciate you informing me on 3 separate occasions that I'm not under investigation, I nevertheless concur with the judgment of the Department of Justice that you are not able to effectively lead the Bureau. And it was signed, Donald Trump.
He's become more famous than me.
Except the Trump campaign was being investigated by the FBI for its links to Russia. James Comey was leading the investigation, and now he's gone.
Are people going to suspect cover-up? Absolutely. If an independent special prosecutor is appointed, there still can be some faith that we can get to the bottom of this. If not, everyone will suspect cover-up.
Speaking on US TV, the president's advisor dismissed that notion.
It has nothing to do with Russia. It has everything to do with whether the current FBI director has the president's confidence and can faithfully and capably execute his duties.
Last week, giving testimony, James Comey was accused of unfairly helping Donald Trump. He'd announced just days before the election the FBI was investigating Hillary Clinton for her use of a private email server while she was Secretary of State.
This is terrible. It makes me mildly nauseous to think that we might have had some impact on the election.
What Mr. Comey didn't say before the election was that Trump's Russia ties were being investigated too. At campaign rallies, Donald Trump had been gushing in his praise of Comey's move to announce the Hillary investigation.
It took guts for Director Comey to make the move that he made.
But it was clear in recent days the FBI director's continued pursuit of that Russia investigation was a huge irritation to the president. There are now questions swirling around about what he'd found out.
Well, the shockwaves from this decision are not just being felt here at the FBI, but across this city and beyond. For his supporters, this is evidence that Donald Trump is a strong leader. But for many others, this just adds to the perception that this country is now being run by a man who is intolerant of those who disagree with him and who don't entirely do his bidding. Ali Makboul, BBC News in Washington.
Lot to take in, isn't there? Well, the BBC's North America editor Jon Sopel has been absorbing events in Washington.
Surprised is a word that is rather mild for the tectonic shift of the political plates that has unfolded this evening in Washington. As I understand it, James Comey, the director of the FBI, was addressing agents in Los Angeles. An aide goes up to him and hands him a note and says, "You better read this." And he reads it, looks down, addresses the audience and says, "I've just been fired." He knew nothing about it. No one else knew anything about it. It was a bolt out of the blue from the White House. They didn't see it coming. And James Comey had been determined to carry on with his work, to carry on the investigation. And you talked about the White House saying, look, this has nothing to do with the inquiry into Russia. As we all know in politics, perceptions matter. And it looks like the person who was conducting the investigation has been fired by people who didn't want him to carry on with it. And it is going to take an awful uphill struggle for the White House to convince the public that it was more innocent than that. I think it's a rather fraught relationship, and it always has been, and in particular over this particular issue. And Russia in the narrowest sense and Russia in the widest sense. You remember that when Donald Trump first became president, he refused to accept the assessment of the intelligence services that Russia had intervened in the election by hacking the Democrats' emails, by affecting the outcome in that way. Then it was confirmed by James Comey, the head of the FBI, that there was an ongoing inquiry by the agency into whether there were links between Russia and the Trump campaign. Donald Trump was absolutely insistent and remains absolutely insistent. There is nothing there. There is nothing to be seen. But the person who was leading the investigation has now been fired. And the reason being given is because of something that happened a year ago when he was looking into the use of Hillary Clinton's emails, which didn't result in a prosecution. And so you had those words from Donald Trump, the kind of brutal firing of the head of the FBI. You are hereby terminated, removed from office, effective immediately. I think what it says is that he doesn't want much dissent. He wants to have his own people in, and that is, you know, fair enough. A president will kind of, you know, if you're the chairman of the board, you quite like appointing your own chief executive officer. Dare I say it, in broadcasting, if you want to change the way a news station looks, you fire your presenters and bring in some of your people that you like. But this has a different resonance, because it looks like, and there are and the word that is being used tonight in the US is Nixonian. It looks like this is a throwback to Richard Nixon's second term in office, when he fired the special prosecutor who was called to investigate him, and people are using that phrase, and we heard it from Chuck Schumer there a moment ago, cover up. That is deeply damaging, and I've heard it being reported that there is some surprise in the White House that this is causing the ructions that it is. I am astonished that anyone thought the reaction would be anything other than what it is.
Jon Sopel there. Well, it's the start of a new political era in South Korea as a new president takes the helm. A short while ago, Moon Jae-in was sworn in. It was the highest election turnout, by the way, in 20 years. And Mr. Moon won with just over 40% of the vote. That's almost double his nearest competitor. His victory does end almost a decade of conservative rule and could also herald a more conciliatory approach toward North Korea. Let's get more on that now from our correspondent Steve Evans, who's in the South Korean capital, Seoul, for us. Steve, we very much know that there are two big things in his in-tray in his first day in office, and that is, of course, North Korea, perhaps a new policy on that, and unifying and healing South Korea as well, following the corruption scandal.
Yeah, and on that second point, the tone has been very, very different from the previous president. The inauguration was 10 minutes long, not much ceremony. It was very businesslike. He visited the opposition headquarters. He's gone to the Blue House just over that road there, the presidential palace, but he also says that's not where he's going to work. It feels like business as usual in Seoul today. And it does feel like the start of a different period, of something new. I say business as usual, except about 10 minutes ago, the motorcade went through, and he was sticking out the top of the open-top car. Firstly, that's minimal security, and also, again, a very different tone. Now, maybe every new leader comes in with a different tone, saying they want to unify the country. That's what leaders do. The test will be if he can do it. He says he wants a much more egalitarian country. Well, he could do that with tax rates, for example, but he also says he wants to get growth for people at the bottom higher. That's a lot more difficult. So, a lot of promises in terms of tone and gesture, and a feeling in the country that something new has started.
What about the North, Steve? We know he was their preferred candidate. Why would that be?
He said that he would visit Pyongyang if the conditions were right. That's what Donald Trump has said. I would talk to Kim Jong-un if the conditions were right. So he's not coming out with the out-and-out embrace of what used to be called the Sunshine Policy when he was last at the centre of government, which is a policy of cooperation with the North. That will be the point of tension, the point of question, if you like, with Washington. In America, the election is being presented as almost an anti-American candidate. He took pains to say in his address on TV a short time ago that he wanted to meet President Trump and he looked forward to a constructive relationship. But you're absolutely right. If Mr. Trump goes down the road he seems to be going down, which is negotiation, put out feelers, look for possibilities of change and renunciation of nuclear weapons in the North, then maybe talk, but if not, the big stick. Whereas President Moon here is saying, no, look, we need to talk to him, really, you know, we don't want to risk war, then there will be a difficulty between the two.
Interesting times ahead, as always. Steve, good to see you, good to talk to you. Many thanks for that. Steve Evans there for us in Seoul. Much more on that new chapter for South Korea on BBC News Online. Let's catch up with the business news now. Sally's joined us in the studio. What have you got for us, Sally?
Toyota. We are keeping an eye on the Japanese car giant. It is the world's second biggest car maker, and it will tell us how it's been doing in the first 3 months of the year in the next few hours. So the Japanese car giant is expected to reveal it's had a tough quarter, with operating profits falling by 30%. And the key reason why is the slowdown in the United States taking its toll on their business this year. And this follows a record year in the US last year when car makers sold 17.6 million vehicles. That's an all-time high. It would seem, though, that at least for now, the winning run is coming to an end in Toyota's biggest market. Compared to the same period last year, the company's experienced a drop in sales in every month of 2017. As consumers look towards more environmentally friendly models, Toyota's been ramping up its investment in greener technology, and by the end of the decade, it hopes to sell at least 30,000 hydrogen-powered vehicles per year. So we'll be getting an expert view on Toyota in World Business Report. Also, politicians, not least the President, wants to talk about undocumented workers and border walls, but the real problem the US economy has with migrant workers is that it needs more of them. Businesses, particularly in agriculture and tourism, are finding it harder to find the all-important seasonal staff that they need to stay afloat. They want the visa programs that allow people to come to work in the US on a temporary basis to be overhauled pronto. Samira Hussain will be reporting from a farm in Chester, New Jersey. So I'll see you soon.
Sally, thank you for that. See you soon. And do stay with us if you can here at BBC News. Still to come. We're going to be following the treacherous journey by sea from Libya to Europe. We're going to be speaking to some of the migrants being brought ashore in Italy after being rescued, only to still face an uncertain future.
I, Nelson Rolihlahla Mandela, do hereby swear to be faithful to the Republic of South Africa
After 6 years of construction and numerous delays, the Channel Tunnel has been formally opened by the Queen and President Mitterrand. But the tunnel is still not yet ready for passengers and freight services to begin.
For centuries, Christianity and Islam struggled for supremacy. Now, the Pope's visit symbolizes their willingness to coexist.
Roger Bannister became the first man in the world to run a mile in under 4 minutes.
Memories of victory as the VE celebrations reach their climax.
This night is dedicated to everyone who believes in a future of peace and freedom.
This is BBC News. Our main headline this hour: President Trump has fired the director of the FBI, James Comey, the man leading the investigation into possible collusion between his election campaign and Russia. Well, President Trump has approved the supply of US weapons to a Kurdish-led rebel alliance fighting the so-called Islamic State group in Syria. The Pentagon said the Syrian Democratic Forces, which are led by the Kurdish militia, the YPG, was the only group on the ground that could successfully seize the IS stronghold of Raqqa in the near future. Greg Dawson reports.
Advancing toward enemy lines. These are the Syrian Democratic Forces made up of Arab and Kurdish militia. And with the help of airstrikes from a US-led coalition, they're inching their way towards Raqqa, the capital of the Islamic militant self-proclaimed caliphate. This footage shows both Arab and Kurdish fighters battling Islamic State militants for control of the city of Tabqa. It's an IS command center just 50 kilometers from Raqqa. Now, as they close in on their main target, President Trump has approved supplying weapons to the Kurdish forces, including heavy machine guns, bulldozers and armored vehicles.
The president authorized the Department of Defense to equip Kurdish elements of the Syrian Democratic Forces as necessary to ensure a clear victory over ISIS in Raqqa, Syria. The fight for Raqqa will be long and difficult, but ultimately yet another defeat for ISIS and another step towards eliminating the ISIS threat.
But it's a step that's certain to anger a NATO ally. Turkey views the Kurdish fighters as an extension of the PKK, a group it's been fighting for decades. On Monday, it carried out airstrikes on Kurdish rebels in northern Iraq. But from the moment he took office, Donald Trump has made it clear his #1 foreign policy goal is defeating IS. And it seems unsettling relations with Turkey in the process is a price the president is willing to pay. Greg Dawson, BBC News.
Well, we continue to follow the treacherous journeys still being made in huge numbers by migrants hoping for a new life in Europe. The United Nations says nearly 250 people are feared drowned as a boat reportedly sank off the Libyan coast on Sunday, and another 2 days earlier. Well, yesterday we brought you a report from on board the Save the Children rescue boat, which picks up migrants from the waters. Today, the BBC's Rita Chakrabarti is with some of them as they're brought ashore.
A new day and perhaps a new life. After days on the deck of this rescue ship, it's the first glimpse of Europe for people who left the shores of Libya unsure they'd survive to see this. Trying to cross continents in these dinghies felt like their only hope, said several. Like this young Nigerian man who said he'd been working in Libya as a welder until his foot was blown off by an explosive. He preferred not to give his name.
Everybody don't have choice, nobody have choice. There is one, even me, I think that this water that I'm going to cross, if I'm dead, is God know why.
He said he couldn't return home because of Boko Haram. Now, first off the ship, he's helped to safety. On shore, there's chocolate and panettone for breakfast, and as people are checked and processed, a warm welcome Italian style.
Where are you from? Gambia.
Many look dazed. The contrast with what they've come from is stark.
This is the end of the long sea journey. The injured came out first, then women and children, and now the rest. But they're arriving in a Europe where attitudes are hardening against them. The future for many is uncertain.
All humanity is present on these treacherous crossings, and the rescuers make no distinction between the persecuted and the poor. But Europe does. existing fears about migration and the fact that over 43,000 people have arrived this way this year mean the reception they can expect will be very mixed. For those who have arrived, another journey has started. They may have reached their longed-for goal, but admission here in Europe and acceptance might still elude them. Rita Chakrabarti, BBC News in Calabria, southern Italy.
The British Prime Minister Theresa May and her husband Philip have appeared on the BBC's The One Show as part of the general election campaign. Their aim was to offer an insight into life in Downing Street. Our correspondent Sophie Long was watching.
Make yourself comfortable.
It was their first joint television interview. This is how Theresa May decided to show voters what makes her tick. She says she believes the public should have the chance to see who they're voting for. Not in a prime ministerial debate, but on the One Show sofa, with her husband by her side.
Try to give Theresa as much support as I possibly can, Matt. I think that's just really important. I mean, it's obviously a very tough job. There are a lot of tough decisions, a lot of things that, you know, you really have to work very hard at as PM. And I think I'm there to give Theresa as much support as I possibly can, just the way she's always given me support.
I was going to say, it's because it's a two-way street.
It is a two-way street, absolutely.
But traditional, nonetheless.
I get to decide when I take the bins out, not if I take the bins out. But, I mean, of course...
There's boy jobs and girl jobs, you see.
There were no difficult political questions, and it's fair to say we didn't learn much. But this was a rare opportunity to hear from him and to see them together.
I was taught by my parents is whatever job you're doing, just get on and do your best in that job. And that's how I've approached everything in my career. And so that's what I was doing. But of course... Sorry.
Well, I knew you were interested in politics, but I never heard Theresa say she wanted to be Prime Minister until she was well established in the shadow cabinet.
A small insight, perhaps, as that would mean Theresa May had prime ministerial ambitions much earlier than she'd previously let on. It was live, unscripted. They weren't told what the questions would be in advance. As with many of the Prime Minister's appearances of this campaign so far, there weren't that many voters in sight. But this one was beamed into the homes of about 3.5 million viewers. And there was a rare, jovial moment about a European institution.
Eurovision, we're not leaving that as well, are we?
No. I'm tempted to say in current circumstances, I'm not sure how many votes we'll get.
Sophie Long, BBC News.
The UK never gets many anyway, does it? Let's face it. Now to one of the most iconic buildings in the world. But did you know that the Sydney Opera House has bad acoustics? I know. A 4-year renovation project is now underway to address this and some other pretty key issues, if you ask me. Howard Griffiths has the story.
It's the building that defines not just Sydney, but Australia's place in the world. Bold and bathed in sunshine, the Opera House's tall sails are iconic. But inside the sound is, well, not so stunning. For its resident symphony orchestra, it's a regular frustration. The shape of the concert hall makes it hard to hear themselves or each other play.
It's a bit like playing football on a pitch that's sort of shrouded in fog, and you know your teammates are out there somewhere, but they're a bit hard to see, and for us, I guess the issues there are a bit hard to hear.
Often I don't feel like we're really always playing together, and then with some of the other sections of the orchestra we can actually have time delays at times as we're trying to all follow the conductor.
The problem dates back to the very beginning. Changes were made to the original design. The architect fell out with the engineers and never saw the finished building. After decades of trying out different fixes, a new system of reflectors and risers has been tested, and it's claimed will finally deliver crystal clear sound.
It was honestly like someone had just lifted a perspex box off the top of the orchestra, and you could hear them so much better. The sound sounds a lot closer to you. You feel as if you're actually hearing that you can hear the bow hit the string.
The famous tall sails that form the outside of this building have always placed a limit on what can happen inside. This concert hall is too big for orchestral concerts, for example. The real challenge for the next 4 years is making sure what happens inside here matches the quality of what people see out there.
But there's a mountain to climb. A building with hundreds of steps doesn't offer easy access. Special tunnels will be drilled inside to help wheelchair users. But many of the changes will be behind the scenes.
This has done its duty. It's quite fantastic. It's very Doctor Who.
Much of the equipment used here was ordered 50 years ago and was built into the structure. With 2,000 shows a year, there's been a lot of wear and tear since.
So there's literally someone pulling up and down as you're watching?
Yep. Someone standing in the dark tugging on a rope, yes, is how it's still done for some of the scenery here.
This will be the first time the Opera House will close any of its main theatres, but there will still be music within these walls as they try to fine-tune one of the world's best-loved buildings. Hywel Griffith, BBC News, Sydney.